maybe we can get started. So I'm very happy to introduce today's talk for the networking channel. It's going to be a panel, and we're going to talk about how we can improve diversity and inclusion in the systems and networking community. And the motivation for this is that diversity and inclusion are, clearly very important goals, but oftentimes the path to achieve those goals is not so clear. So in this panel, we're going to brainstorm some ways we can improve upon these goals. And in so doing, we hope to both foster awareness of some of the concerns that have been voiced in our community, as well as to propose concrete ideas that we can all use to bring back to our home institutions to improve equity and inclusion in our daily work. We have a very highly qualified group of speakers on the panel who have fought very strongly throughout their careers in support of these goals. We have Margaret Martonosi, National Science Foundation's Assistant Director for Computer and Information Science and Engineering. While at NSF, Margaret is on leave from Princeton University, where she is the Hugh Trumbull Adams Professor of Computer Science. She is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We have Mythili Vutukuru, Associate Professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Bombay. She received her MS and PhD at MIT in 2010 and conducted a stint in industry at telecom startup Mythili Networks. She has a very extensive history of publishing and service in top venues and has mentored an incredibly diverse array of students. Craig Partridge is the Chair of Computer Science at Colorado State University. Colorado State is an implementation partner of the Northeastern Center for Inclusive Computing and has focused its efforts on increasing the number of undergraduate women who major in computer science. Craig is the former chair of ACM SIGCOM, an IEEE and ACM fellow, and a member of the Internet Hall of Fame. We have Ahmed Elmokashfi, who is a research professor at the Simula Metropolitan Center for Digital Engineering in Norway, where he is heading the Center for Resilient Networks and Applications. He serves as the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for ACM SIGCOM. He received his PhD from the University of Oslo in Norway, his MSc from ETH in Sweden, and his BSc from the University of Khartoum in Sudan. We also have Manuel Perez Quinones, is a professor of software and information systems at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. His service to diversity has been recognized with an ACM Distinguished Member status, CRA's Haberman and the Tapia Achievement Award. He serves on the SIG CSE Board, Advisory Board for CMD IT, Steering Committee for bpcnet.org, member of the Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine at the National Academies. We also want to mention that the networking channel is a series of talks, and next week we will have a talk on how the internet grew up outside the United States and lessons for the future. We would like to invite you to come. All the talks on our channel are free of charge and open for anyone to attend. And with that, we'd like to start the panel. We would like to invite you to participate. You can ask questions here on the Zoom. We also have a Slack channel. We'll post information about that in the chat in a second. And the panelists, some of the panelists are going to try and stay afterwards in the Slack to continue discussions with you. But at that point, I'd like to start the panel. And Manuel, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen. I have a couple of slides. So I have a lot of experience running diversity programs and both within the computing community, but also as Associate Dean of the Grad School at Virginia Tech. That was my responsibility for a few years and a few other capacities. So I've been through this field for a while. I have a few definitions that I want to put up as a way to ground the conversation, but then we can disagree about them, and that will be part of the conversation. So I'm going to share this really quick. And this is a definition of diversity that I really like. It's the individual differences and the group and social differences that can be engaged in the service of learning and working together. And that to me is the key, is there are things that are based on personality, things that are based on groups and social identities. But the key is to bring them in the point of inclusion and make your organization better. This is a definition from university, so it's engaged in the service of learning and working together. That to me is the definition of diversity. Notice that this says nothing about broadening participation or increasing the numbers or inclusiveness, just diversity. Then why is diversity important? And these are just a few points, but there's a lot, literally a lot of different studies that have shown that diversity has additional value to any organization because it brings different points of views. And the more different points of views, the more informed your decisions are, whether you're a judge and a jury making decisions on a case in court, whether you're a women-based owner, women-owned business, providing support business opportunities. In general, diversity is important because you get more points of views into your discussion, into your decision-making, and you consider more options. And there's a lot of research on this. One more that I wanted to throw out is the idea of equity in CS education. And this one is sort of an adaptation of a definition of equity in health. And I see equity in CS education as the absence of systemic disparities in educational outcomes between groups with different levels of representation in computing. So it's the idea that different groups that exist in different sizes within our community have no differences in the outcomes of the mission of your group. This one, again, I'm defining it from the point of view of education. And it's independent of increasing participation. So just because you have very few of one group, they should still have the same outcomes as anybody else, which sort of leads to this image that everybody has seen on the internet that we confuse equity and equality a lot. We said, well, I did this for one group, I have to do the same for the other. Not if that group needed something different to succeed. So that's also an area of discussion. And then broadening participation is increasing the number of people in our field. It's, it's going out of your way to bring in some of those communities that have been marginalized and are not present in computing, whether it's in the classroom, in industry, in the faculty ranks. And again, you have to intentionally go out and bring them in. So I'm gonna pause there. Those are some points of views that we can use to guide the discussion, and I'll pass it on to the next.
All right, great. So I'll go ahead and go next. So good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time zone you are in. I see a lot of friends on the call in the participant list, so thanks for joining. For those who don't know me, I'm Tracy Camp. I'm from Colorado School of Mines, where I founded the Department of Computer Science and served as the department head for 6 years. I'll be retiring soon, joining the Computing Research Association, CRA, as its executive director. As you might imagine, I'm quite excited about 2022. I've been involved in broadening participation in computing my whole career and have assisted in various ways with different organizations and initiatives. Specific to the networking field, I co-founded Networking Women, known as Into Women, with the awesome Wendy Heinzelman at University of Rochester. Into Women aims to foster connections among underrepresented women in the networking and communications field. It is a program for retention, and not so much for recruitment. So that's something to keep in mind. Some activities focus more on recruiting diverse populations to our community, and others focus on retention. In this short intro, I'd like to share some good news and some bad news. So usually we start with the bad, right? Networking continues to have a diversity problem, diversity as defined by gender and race, ethnicity, both for women and for other groups marginalized in tech. And our diversity problem actually in networking is a lot worse than in other computing disciplines, unfortunately. Now, I wish I had international numbers to share because I know there's a few people on the call outside North America, but I don't. But I do have some numbers I can share from, thanks to the CRA Talby survey. This is some data on PhD degrees that have been awarded in North America over the last 10 years. So in all computing disciplines within North America, the last 10 years, women earned 19.7% of PhD degrees awarded in computing. But in networking, women earned less than that, only 16.3%. The statistics are even more grim for other groups marginalized in tech, such as domestic African Americans and Hispanics. In all computing disciplines, these other marginalized tech, marginalized groups only earn 3.4% 4% of PhD degrees awarded in computing in North America. And then within networking, the subdiscipline, these other groups only earned 1.2%, which is clearly, I mean, this is clearly unacceptable. Now, I didn't create slides today, but let me just put into the chat for those of you who are visual learners, the data. Did that go through? Yeah, okay, great. So this data is over a 10-year period. And if you look at the data year by year, you'll see we actually haven't really moved the needle at all. So that's a little disappointing. In short, we have a real diversity problem, both in computing and in networking. And since we know diversity inspires innovation, this should be a significant concern to everyone in the networking community. So now let's turn to the good news. We haven't learned everything that there is to learn, but we have learned a lot on why computing is less diverse than what we'd like it to be, thanks to years of research. We now need to do the work to help ensure our door is open and welcoming to everyone. And fortunately, there are several great resources and programs available to assist our networking community members to, again, do the work. As an example, within CSF Minds, we more than doubled the percent of women and more than doubled the percent of other groups marginalized in tech by doing the work. But we need everyone to do the work, not just those who are marginalized in tech. We need majority men to step up, for example. We also, need them to help do the work. So a big shout out to all the majority men on this call. Thank you for being a part of this. Now, I look forward to our discussion today, and if asked, I would be happy to discuss any of the great resources and programs that exist out there, whether they're at ACM, CIC, CRA, IEEE, Into Women, NSF, NCWIT, for example. That was in alphabetical order. Oh, no, not quite, actually, almost. These resources and programs are available for all of us to do the work. So thanks to Matt and Jim for inviting me to participate on this call. So who's up next?
I believe I am, and there's a nice tie-in. So I'm here. I'm here as the chair of the computer science department at Colorado State University. We were a BRAID affiliate in 2019. We have been an implementation partner with the Northeastern Center for Inclusive Computing since 2020. And really my expertise for this panel is about doing the work, just as Tracy said. We spend about $300,000 a year on diversity efforts, really ranging from curriculum reform to make our courses more inclusive, to advising, improving our advising for our students, both in terms of availability and also quality of advising, working on retention, working on recruitment, working on hiring issues. I probably going to give a message that people don't necessarily find very comfortable, which is that there comes a point in time when doing the work becomes expensive. All right. You actually have to invest not simply somebody's time, but a certain amount of financial resources. I'm impatient. I like to see change very fast, which is why we're spending a fairly large amount of money. You can accelerate the process to some degree by spending a little bit, a substantial amount more, maybe a little bit more. We can argue about that over the course of the call. But just to give a concrete example of this, we have courses in our department that we know drive women and minority students out of computing. Okay, we used to have more of them. We have gotten rid of most of them. Those courses were taught by faculty members who were deeply interested in encouraging diversity, making their classroom more welcoming, bringing more people in. And yet the courses were still driving people out. And the problem was the curriculum, which was sort of the way we thought we had to teach computer science, was busted. And fixing that, ranging from fixing the examples you use to fixing how you introduce materials, how do you put in repetition so people retain materials, all of these sorts of things, typically for a course cost us about $80,000 to fix, because we would put 2 graduate students on it to be measuring all the aspects of the course as it was going on, we teach parallel versions. We teach the old version and a new section with the new version of the course. So we saw for a particular cohort which changes made a difference and how much. So it's a very complicated process. Now they'll fix the course in about a year, but it's a very expensive thing to do. And yet it's the sort of investment you have to make. So I'm really here to talk about those sorts of implementation problems. And I want to give a shout out here to a couple of people. One is to Tracy, who until she took on her new activity was actually our advisor from the CIC as we took on some of these activities, and also to Carla Broadley, who I see is one of the participants, who was the head of the CIC and who gave us certainly a large chunk of the money that we've been investing in these sorts of activities. And with that, I'll pass it on to the next person.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be on this panel. My name is Mythili Vutukuru, and I'm a faculty member at IIT Bombay from India. So thanks to Matt and Jim for inviting me to this panel. It's a great honor to talk after and to talk along with all of these great people who are doing a lot to improve diversity. For example, I myself as a grad student had attended the N2 Women events and benefited a lot from it. So it's great to hear about all of these ideas and initiatives to improve diversity with respect to gender, race, and ethnicity. And as Tracy said, I mean, there is both good news and bad news. We are doing a lot, and I'm sure there is a long way to go as well. And I'm sure that we will make progress on this. So the angle that I would like to bring about personally is from my own personal experiences. So I was a grad student in the US for many years before I moved back as a faculty member back to India. And this has sort of given me a different point of view with respect to diversity and equity when it comes to participation in the SIGCOMM events. For example, I find that personally, it is a lot harder for me to attend any of the conferences. It's a lot harder for me to make my grad students attend conferences as compared to the opportunities that I had when I was in the US. And similarly, as a faculty member, it's a lot more difficult for me to participate in program committees. I'll have to turn down invitations because I really cannot spend a huge amount of money and sit on a 24-hour plane ride for a 2-day meeting. So there are a lot of logistical issues when it comes to geographical diversity to, let people from all over the world kind of be part of this SIGCOMM community. So right now the center of gravity is sort of more around North America and Europe, but I have, for example, as a grad student, when I was attending SIGCOMM, I don't remember meeting anybody from Africa, for example, right? I mean, of course, India is still one of those countries that's a little away from the center, but still we do see a lot of decent amount of participation. So I shouldn't particularly complain, but it is still hard, of course. The distance makes a lot of things hard. So I'm just wondering if we as a community can find ways to make people from all over the world be more part of this community, along with all the other initiatives like ensuring equity with respect to gender and race and ethnicity. I was wondering if we could maybe also do something about this geographic diversity, right? I would like it if my PhD students, my grad students also get to participate in SIGCOMM the way I had, the opportunities that I had when I was in the US. And if I could participate the way my colleagues who've decided to stay back in the US after the PhD, the kind of opportunities that they get, I would be happy to do that. And of course, distance makes things hard, right? There's some fundamental limits with respect to distance that we cannot overcome. But I think this online mode has made things a lot easier. COVID has been a little bit of a blessing in disguise, if I may say so, for some of these issues, because a lot of the PC meetings have very recently gotten online, conferences have gone online. And this has made participation from all over the world a little bit more easier for people who are not geographically close to the center of gravity of this community. So if we could kind of, even after things get back to normal after COVID, I'm still hoping for online PC meetings and online talks at conferences so that we don't, feel very disconnected from this community that we would all like to be a part of. And I'm sure the community will also benefit from, crowdsourcing ideas from a larger pool of students and a larger pool of faculty. So I would like to use the time on this panel to see what we can do to improve participation from countries that are underrepresented in the SIGCOMM community, and what we can do to provide a level playing field for students and researchers from all over the world. Thank you.
I think it's me next. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Matt and Jane, for inviting me to be on this panel with all these great panelists. And it's great to see many friends and colleagues in the audience, and to see this this interest. Like, we have a large number of audience, which is quite, to me, is really interesting, because it shows that people are interested in this non-technical topic, right? So we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and there seems to be a huge interest in the community. So I am, as Matt said, I serve currently as a director for diversity and inclusion at SIGCOMM. Besides that, over the past few years, I've been working with colleagues from Africa, various African countries, Afrinic and Internet Society, on promoting internet research systems in internet and systems research in Africa through the organization of conferences, workshops, and collaboration networks. And also my personal background, spent time in different countries, work with different people, led a very diverse group. I have a group with people from all continents, which has been a quite humbling and interesting learning journey, right? To learn from all these people, to basically learn about their perspectives and points of views. So I will share some slides just to show the current the status at SIGCOMM. So let me share those slides. In terms of diversity and inclusion. So let me just go for, yeah, right. So first, I think I agree with the definitions from Manuel when it comes to diversity. And to me, diversity is more, at this stage, is not about having an equal representation, but it's more about having an inclusive community where we welcome all newcomers, make it easier for them, and also go out of our way to include underrepresented groups. And to basically to be willing to listen to their views and to understand their perspectives. So if we look at SIGCOMM today, if we look at our membership, this is how it looks, right? I mean, SIGCOMM is really US heavy. So we have about 50% of our members coming from the US. The rest are scattered around the world, but there are a few remarks that I would like to make, that we have very low participation from Africa and also from South America, and the Middle East, and even in Europe. We have many countries without any members. But I would like to stress that membership is not equal to community, right? Our community is much bigger than our membership. Our community includes all those who publish, attend, follow SIGCOMM, right? And again, it's still, our community is male dominated. We have 82% of our members are males. So another way to look at this is to look at who attend and who publish at SIGCOMM, right? So we look at SIGCOMM 2021, and this map here shows our attendees. I mean, we had a virtual conference, right? So this gave many people the opportunity to follow the conference. They didn't have to travel. They didn't have to go through visa issues and so on. And here we see a very interesting picture, right? Although we didn't have a huge membership in South America, there is sort of like we say like a large community here, like in Brazil, following the conference, as well in Africa, right? So we've seen many markets in Africa where many people were following the conference, and definitely we had more follow from China than membership, and India and the subcontinent here. So this gives an idea about the reach of the community, and it also gives us a hint that we really need to go out of our way to bring in those interested in our community to become really active members of our community, active contributors. And this should go both ways, right? So we shouldn't just expect them to follow. We be in these conferences to them and they just follow. So we expect them at some point to contribute, like others, to our community. If you look at the papers that we had in 2021, it's still, that those reflect the picture from the membership, right? So we have, if you look at the first authors, 66% of them were from the US, and after that came China and the rest of the world. So this gives an idea about where we are today. So we sent out a survey like last week to our membership about diversity and inclusion. We've got very interesting responses from them. I will show a couple answers to a couple questions. So the first question, we asked people, what does it believe that the community is inclusive? And it seems that our membership believe that, well, the majority of them believe that our community is inclusive. So the point is like, if you make it to a community, you will be included. But when it comes to diversity, the opinion is split, right? So half of the community pretty much think that the community is not diverse enough, while some see the community as diverse. We obviously need to control for many confounding factors in those questions. But I think the main takeaway here is that the community is not as diverse as diverse, but seems it's not that diverse, but a little more inclusive, right? So we also got some feedback on suggestions for how to improve diversity, and I would like just to share them with you and probably hear from the other panelists their views on this, and if the audience can follow up with questions. So the first point, which I agree with, and we work on doing that in SICOM, is to improve outreach to underrepresented communities, to increase awareness both within our community about these issues of diversity, like surveys with reaching out to our community, and increase awareness about SICOM outside SICOM. So the second point is to make conferences accessible to underrepresented groups. So COVID has basically helped us accelerating, having these online conferences, and we managed to do that for 2 years. And probably we need to think about how to leverage this development to make conferences accessible to underrepresented groups in the future. And as I said earlier, it's not only about having one-way communication where we stream these conferences. It's very important to have a back channel where people can interact and feel part of the community, ask questions, engage in discussions. So another point that came up, it's that people we've had a mentoring program that was co-located conferences, various conferences. I've seen that many people in the membership like the mentoring program, and they think that this mentoring program can help bring in underrepresented groups. Another point is to encourage our membership to reach out and support diversity efforts, both in their home institutions, society in general. And one way to do that is to probably introduce an award to sort of like increase awareness and to show that we value those efforts and support them. The last point is quite interesting, that to bring out the outside people from underrepresented groups, our community should also consider working on problems that are relevant to regions outside the most developed part of the world. There are lots of interesting problems, and this is a case in point to make the community more diverse. There are lots of interesting problems that concern parts of the world that are underrepresented in our community, right? So if we start working on those problems in partnership with people from those countries and those regions, that might help bridging the gap that we have now. Thank you. I just need to stop my sharing. Yeah.
That was great. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, Jim, do you want to start asking some questions?
Sure. We're going to have Margaret Martonosi showing up right now. So I do have a couple of questions I wanted to throw up for discussion. But if Margaret's here, maybe we should welcome Margaret. Matt, you want to do an introduction, and then we'll give Margaret a few minutes, and then we can move into a discussion phase.
Sure, yeah. So we're very happy to have Margaret joining us. Margaret, as I mentioned, is the National Science Foundation's Assistant Director for Computer Science, Computer Information Science and Engineering. And yeah, you can take it away, Margaret.
Great, thanks. Hello, everyone, and sorry I'm late here joining. My name is Margaret Martonosi. I lead the SISE Directorate at NSF. For the broader international audience, the U.S. National Science Foundation is America's basic science research funding agency, and it funds the majority of university research in the U.S. across a range of scientific fields. And nowhere is that more true than in computer science, where over 85% of the federal funding for academic research comes from NSF. And the bulk of that comes from the directorate that I lead now and that Jim Kurose led before me. In my role at NSF, I give a lot of talks, and I like to start my presentations with a tree metaphor for research. So planting trees is a long-term thing. You don't do it to get shade right away, you do it for a long-term benefit. And when NSF invests in research, and frankly, when we as researchers do research, that's also a long-term thing as well. And broadening participation in computing, likewise, is another form of long-term commitment. So eliminating barriers and truly broadening participation in computing is going to take some time to achieve. But with the right commitments and with the right efforts across the whole field, we can both engage widely and support work that has wide benefits. And one of the high order bits of what I want to say is this requires that we are all engaged, the whole community. Second thing, diversity challenges aren't new. In America, the peak percentage of women receiving undergraduate degrees in computer science was 1985. 1985 is women my age now, with gray hair nearing the ends of their careers. The numbers, the percentages of women getting bachelor's degrees in the US dropped precipitously after that. They've started to go back up, but here's the thing. The number of women receiving bachelor's degrees in America only recently, past couple of years, surpassed its 1985 numbers. The number of men receiving bachelor's degrees in America have nearly tripled in the roughly 40 years since then. If you look at other demographic groups, if you look at other geographic issues across the world, you can come up with a million other examples of this sort. Minoritized groups like Blacks, Latinx, and Native Americans receive fewer than 5% of the doctorates in computing, despite them making up well over a third of the US population. So I'm giving a US centric view because I lead a US agency, but I think we realize that with different nuances, these things are important across around the world and for many different groups. I personally would love for diversity panels to become a thing of the past, but we can't stop diversity panels until we've solved the problem. And so we have to keep working. We have to keep moving the needle. One high leverage thing that I wanted to mention that NSF has done over the past roughly 10 years or so is it funded a new advanced placement computer science principles exam. So these AP exams are used certainly nationally, but also worldwide to help give students the ability to earn college credit during high school. They tend to be kind of a North Star that can guide high school curricula in a particular direction. And in the process, AP CS principles has dramatically increased the number and diversity of students taking CS classes in high school. And it's showing the sticking power of particularly diverse groups in going on to actually major in computer science. So it's a happy win for us. Another example of something we're doing at scale is asking all US proposers on medium and large projects to submit a BPC plan as part of their proposal. And this is one of these things where we're trying to get the whole community engaged. And the key is that it really has to be that whole community. It's not fair and it's not feasible to expect members of an underrepresented or marginalized communities to be the sole laborers in doing the work of changing our community's diversity and inclusion. And so then the last thing I want to say or tee up here is about how different entities play a role in this. So I'm at NSF, so I'm speaking from a strongly NSF perspective right now. But there's different organizations and different entities that can really help shift things. A key one that I want to raise here is that of professional societies and organizations. We're seeing some movement in terms of codes of conduct for our conferences, some demographic surveys for some aspects of participating in conferences. But I still can't easily find out the demographics of first authorship at different publication communities, I still can't easily look into the sticking power over careers of folks who showed up at our conferences early and where are they now. So there's different things that the conference communities, the SIGs, and the professional society level, ACM, IEEE, AAAI, and so forth, could do to help us here. And I would love for that to be part of what we talk about. And again, sorry I'm late, and I will go into panel mode now. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Margaret. We've had a number of questions. Matt, I think we should ask a couple of questions that have come up in the question and answer box, but maybe let me lead off for a question for the panel that actually ties into something that Margaret was just talking about earlier. Mythili and Ahmed had talked about the importance of building international community and how the conferences are one way to do that. But one of the two of you also said, it can't just be sort of information push in the sense that, you attend the conference and, it's coming to you, but there have to be interactive ways. There may be ways to build mentoring networks, to do other more interactive activities beyond just attending a conference. And so I guess I wanted to throw open to the panelists this question of mentoring, and maybe also with a slant on to what extent can the use of Zoom or other ways of connecting with people be used to build an international community beyond just attending a conference or just watching a talk. I guess since I asked the question, I should moderate. Craig, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, so I'm just going to make a couple of comments about mentoring. It is tremendously valuable. Fahad Dogar and I believe, initiated the SIGCOM mentoring program, or if not, we took it to another substantial level several years ago, in which we arranged for any and all graduate students who were at the conference, and remember, SIGCOM funds a certain number of graduate students from around the world to come, so that it's a fairly rich and diverse group, to be able to schedule a mentoring meeting with any one of a number of people who volunteered to be mentors, to meet with them for 30 minutes, talk about their research, talk about where they were trying to go in their work and so forth. It was, running that process was incredibly moving, in part because the students were just so, in many cases, almost terrified to meet with their mentor. They were meeting with senior people in the field, but they were also tremendously appreciative afterwards about feedback and context that they got. And in some cases, and I'd love to see ways to make this happen more, people stayed connected. That is, the mentors were quite free about saying, here's my email address, I'd love to be able to chat, exchange things. And certainly in the few cases in which it has managed to stay going longer term for me, I have found that there's a tremendous benefit to mentoring people, even if you only are dealing with your mentor on the order of once a year, once every 2 years, as they're progressing in their career. And they said, I just hit the following bump, I hit the following issue. How do I deal with it? Any ideas? That their ability to reach out to somebody outside their organization, but in their field, is a tremendously valuable thing. And I mention this in part because I think people think of mentoring as somehow some very intense, you're meeting with somebody every week or every month. And the answer is it doesn't have to be that way, and it can still make a tremendous difference. So. Right.
So, the comments you made about mentoring, Craig, sort of are spot on. Tracy noted that at N2 Women conferences, for instance, there are mentoring networks associated with that. And mentoring has been shown to be very effective, even in like double-blind studies of engineering students. If you have a mentoring network, it helps to solve the retention problem that we talked about earlier. So Manuel, you're up next, and then Mythili, you're up after Manuel.
A lot of the SIGs have doctoral consortiums, but those tend to be towards the end of the grad students. I think I've said this to a couple of leaders. We ought to have the sort of the bookend on the other at the beginning of young grad students, a mentoring workshop. And a lot of the groups have created these, but they should be incorporated into the SIG. They should have a mentoring and a doctoral consortium. And the mentoring is in the first 2 years of your PhD. So you get to meet your peers, get to meet the senior people in the field, get to establish connections. And then the doctoral consortium is more to help you sort of to launch your research career. That's one way to incorporate it into the existing SIG meetings. The challenge is that each SIG, as the data that Tracy showed, as it is not very diverse. So we need to think of ways that we can do this across all SIGs so that the two Latinos on one meet the two Latinos on the other corner and start building a little bit bigger community within the computing field.
Great. Mythili?
Yeah, so the one other thing I'd like to suggest is not just mentoring as in a way to connect the junior people with the senior people, but I think there should also be a way for peers to network with each other. So for example, when you attend a physical conference, you share hotel rooms with other grad students, you meet them at lunch and dinner and in the banquets and all of that. So now when people from other countries attend SIGCOM online, there's really no way for them to connect with other grad students, say in the US or Europe, and kind of learn from them. So it'll be great if these mentoring programs also find a way for peers, grad students in different countries to connect with each other and hopefully network with each other, learn from each other, and take this relationship forward. Right? That will really help people from underrepresented communities. Also, probably they won't be as diffident when speaking to a peer as they would be with like a senior mentor.
That's a really great great remark. And I'll point out that we have a group of graduate students in Brazil, actually, who have expressed an interest in organizing a peer mentoring and discussion network in the networking channel among graduate students. And so for the organizing committee for the networking channel, we've been talking with Edmundo de Souza e Silva in Brazil, and also with half a dozen graduate students there about how we might do that. So I hope to see something exactly like what you mentioned done in the networking channel pretty soon, because it's already under discussion. So Ahmed, you're next, and then I think, Matt, you will pull some questions from the Q&A box.
I would like just to add to what Mythili said, is that, it's really great that we do mentoring, during conferences, but to include more students, if we could start thinking about doing this online, like having remote pods while we're having these conferences, so to encourage local participation in countries that are remote, people cannot travel, and include those people in the mentoring program. So it's true that SIGCOM is, we have these youth diversity grants, which we try to distribute to people from underrepresented groups and to get them to come to SIGCOM and other conferences. But still, the bulk of the audience or the target group does not travel to the conference. So the mentoring program, by trying to just go out of our way and reaching out to those people through remote pods and to interact with them, we can probably manage to increase broaden the reach of this mentoring program.
Yeah, thank you. We wanted to take a question from the audience, kind of related to the current point. Could you all talk about online versus in-person conferences? Could you talk about the role of online mechanisms for diversity and inclusion in general? Do virtual conferences improve diversity and inclusion? How so? Can being online hurt diversity and inclusion? Are there ways to use online platforms to improve diversity and inclusion beyond conferences as well? If you could talk about this would be great. Margaret, do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. So I was jamming through adding a bunch of links into the chat. I hope some of those are useful. I think one of the things that I've seen, not just over the past 2 years of the pandemic, but actually maybe over the past 5 years, is an increased use of Slack groups for different communities to engage online and in between conferences, and in a way that's very neutral to geography or other constraints that people might have on their time. And I think those have been sort of really wonderful to see. There's one, so for example, N2 Women is an example of that within the networking community. There's a Slack group. There's a similar one for computer architecture. There's actually a Women in Computer Architecture group. There's also a Students in Computer Architecture group that is broad across different demographics. And so those have been really great, and they've actually fostered interesting things. Paper reading clubs that are happening completely virtually and completely decoupled from a particular conference. Mentoring, practice talks even are happening through those. So that's all wonderful. Back to virtual conferences. It's been a rough couple of years. I don't know if I hope someone else here can share a positive virtual conference story, because I find myself good at registering for them and less good at really digging in and engaging successfully. They vary a lot with platform. But I think we have a long way to go before they feel fun enough that you actually want to engage virtually. Hopefully, when we're in a more hybrid space, we'll figure out ways to help the folks who cannot travel feel more included, because I think the fact that so much of CS orients itself around conferences you have to travel to is a really anti-inclusive aspect to our culture. And yet virtual conferences haven't really been super fun for networking yet either. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Greg, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to sort of, I think, build on Margaret's comment about the fact that we haven't managed to make the virtual mode of conferences anywhere near as powerful as the in-person. And I'm just going to take two quick examples. One was the first SIGCOMM Latin American conference, which was held when I was SIG chair now decades ago, was in Costa Rica. And what I remember most vividly about that conference is, beyond the tremendous excitement, by putting it in Latin America and providing travel support, we made it possible for about 100 grad students to show up from all over Latin America. And their palpable excitement of meeting each other, and the room was just completely filled with energy. And I still remember at the end of the second day, the local students, one of the local grad students stood up and said, we've arranged for a dance hall. We want to invite all of the other grad students here to come join us, and we'll show you how Ticos party. And the links that were made as a result of that meeting, all of which came about because they were in the same room, felt that energy, was tremendously important. Another smaller example, early in my career, I was part of a 15 or so person research group across multiple institutions. We met twice a year in person. We actually used early internet video tools, the Vic and VAT tools that Van Jacobson developed way back then, were actually to support our meetings in part. We found that we had to meet in person periodically. If we tried to just meet virtually, it did not create the same sort of serendipitous side conversations and personal connections that drove our research and made the teams work. And we have, so I don't know if we'll ever fix that, but we certainly have to push on the video tools much more to make those links work. I mean, I can work with Jim anytime because I've been at so many conferences and so many personal events with Jim. I know who Jim is, and it works to connect virtually. But that's built on a personal interaction from the past, right?
That's great. Yeah, Tracy, can we get your thoughts too?
Yeah, so I know some of us are aware of those mobile robots where a participant from far away can, they control their, and they have a little screen with their head on it. So it's like a talking head that can move around the room and join small groups of people. I participated in a CRA meeting recently where one person was on the mobile robot, and I thought it worked fabulously. It felt like he was in the room. I thought it worked really well. And I know the upcoming new tenure track mentoring workshop that CRA is running at the end of this month, speakers, leaders of the community that usually come to that mentoring workshop have been offered that they could have their own mobile robot during the session that they participate in. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. But I do think as a computing community, we are the ones that need to help solve how to do these hybrid events, because A, I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon, and B, I think it allows us to be more inclusive on a geographical scale to have these hybrid events So I'm hopeful for the future, but as those who know me, I'm always the optimist.
Okay, great. I just make a comment that a lot of people have been chatting in the chat box about the importance of a Slack channel. And Margaret, a number of people have asked that you post the SIGARCH resources that you'd mentioned. I think some of them maybe just went to panelists and not to the whole group. So maybe if you could join the Slack channel sometime afterwards and post those resources there, they'll live in perpetuity, whereas the chat box is going to go away. And again, encourage everybody to participate in the Slack channel discussion. There was a question that came up in the Q&A, and let me see if I can somewhat rephrase it. This has to do specifically with in-person conferences, and the comment was made that, well, when a person came to the conference, they were welcomed, but then in the end, people went away and they talked with the people they were writing proposals and papers with. And I think probably for that particular conference, there wasn't a forum or a mechanism for people to get together except with the people that they maybe already knew and they were writing a proposal or a paper or something like that with. So maybe Ahmed, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but representing SIGCOM or others who've, many of you have been program committee chairs and things like that, conference chairs, what are some of the specific mechanisms that can be used in a conference setting so that we don't sort of have the pro forma welcome, wonderful to have everybody here, but then people sort of go off in their own corners with people they know. What's proven useful in conferences, and also what might then again be brought over into the virtual world in order to enable that for people who can't make it to the conference? Somebody want to jump in? Oh, Ahmed.
I can jump in here. That's quite an interesting question. I think apart from social events, it's very hard to get people to sit together. But when it comes to the virtual space, I think we need to think differently, right? By creating work groups, by getting people to work together on basically brainstorming, for example, about or giving feedback on how the conference was organized, giving feedback on basically discussing things that are related to organizing future conferences. So we put people on the spot and ask them to to work together. Because in the virtual settings, as many said, you just come to the conference, you watch the talk, maybe you ask a question or two, and then you go back to your normal activities, right? So you're not staying physically in the conference. So the problem becomes even worse. It's true, in the conference you might go and hang around your friends or colleagues or people that you have writing proposals with, but in the virtual setting, you actually go back to your meetings or to your students or to other things, which makes it even a lot worse. So I think we need to think differently about organizing collaborative spaces within those online events, and get people, encourage people to be part of those. And in those collaborative events, we can play the role of assigning people to different groups or encouraging people to be in different groups. And this way you get them to work with each other, talk to each other, and get to know each other, right? So apart from that, in actual conferences, you have these events for students, for example. You have the industry events that get various dinners, end-to-women dinner, and those events. So they get people talk to each other and talk about other things that are different from proposals and next papers. Maybe Matt, yeah.
So Jim, if I could just add one tidbit on that one. I also think that creating what I will call affinity and dinners, events, things that, so after you have that grand welcome, creating small group events where you say, hey, people who are interested in, it can be women who want to connect, it can be people who want to go on a tour of the town that you're in, but creating these small group opportunities for people to meet, particularly early in the conference, so that they can actually build on that again later in the conference. So, you know, for example, SIGCOM holds a student dinner the night of the, you know, after indeed the welcoming reception historically, and those have been very popular for students to connect up and then go off and do things for the rest of the conference. And we fill it with some faculty members who are willing to sort of be informal mentors during the conference. So they get seated at tables with faculty members in 12 students or so. And sometimes I've been at those tables and the students go off and do their own thing. And sometimes they connect with me and then they connect with me throughout the conference. So finding ways to tie people in at the very start of the conference so that the following 2 or 3 days, they feel they're part of a community, I think helps tremendously.
Right, and I will simply chime in and say, if you're not able to make it to the conference in person, having a controllable virtual presence like a robot that Tracy was mentioning, where you could go around and participate in that might be something very interesting to try out. I've seen a number of comments about that in the chat. So Tracy, then Manuel.
So real quick, you could also imagine creatively using your badge for the attendees. So the conference I was at last week, they had 3 different color lanyards around your neck. Green meant open to meet people and shake hands. Yellow meant I'm willing to meet you, but kind of keep your distance. And red meant stay away from me. You know, you could imagine, you know, once we're past the pandemic, using those colors to represent, I'm open to meet people. Because I think for those that don't have a lot of connections, if they see a green badge that is saying open to meet, they might feel more talking to that person. You could also imagine ribbons on the badge of the groups that, or the type of people that you're looking to meet. My point being is, I think we could think creatively around the badges that people wear at events to help people connect.
And I'll add a different perspective. I think a lot of the structure of the conferences have been put together because we always assume everyone was going to be there, right? So we have lightning talks, which are really short talks that it's just, you're there, you might as well give a 5-minute presentation. And we have birds of a feather. I mean, the birds of a feather at 60, which is one of the conferences that I've helped organize, were largely structured because we had an hour to kill and we had the room reserved, so might as well put something in there. A lot of those things probably don't make sense when half the participants are remote. And maybe something different makes sense when half the participants are remote. We need to rethink the structure of the conferences. It's really easy to record a presentation, a talk, a research talk, and just submit a video. Most people even stay in the hallway and talk to others because they can read the paper. Maybe the research talks would be different and has more online, I don't know. We need to think of how to leverage the hybrid and the virtual, and in that capacity, think of it as a way to do more inclusion.
Margaret, you had your hand up?
I decided to drop my hand, and Ahmed has his hand
Okay,
up.
Ahmed.
Yeah, so I want to say, like, I previously seen at various conferences like nano industry conferences, they have this newcomers lunch. So, you know, you are a newcomer, first time at the conference. So they invite you to this lunch and invite senior members from the community, right? So this kind of activity, I would say sort of, you know, activity would make, you know, newcomers feel welcome and help them connecting with established members. And doing this on the first day of the conference or on the day before the conference, it might help, you know, including those people more.
Okay, Matt?
Yeah, so we want to take another audience question. So Craig talked about designing and teaching courses to promote diversity and inclusion. We wanted to ask the panel, what kinds of changes to courses are the most impactful? You know, when you design a course to be inclusive, what are the most important aspects to think about? Do you have lessons on how to teach a class to be inclusive? What lessons do you have for people who teach classes on how to improve diversity and inclusivity in the classroom? you have any thoughts along those lines, that would be helpful. Yeah, Craig, can you talk?
So I'll start, and I'm sure people will provide a much richer set of answers, but just a couple of core things. One is it's well known that particularly in the first year courses, separating folks who have computing experience from those who do not has a huge impact, because the people who've come from, secondary schools that don't have a CS course, if they find themselves in a section with lots of people who have, they immediately conclude they're behind, they can't catch up, and they tend to drop out. And this is actually one of the fundamental Braid principles of things that you do. If you create separate sections, that largely solves that problem. Now you may say, well, hold it, how long do I have to keep the sections separate? Initial work said you needed to do it for the full year, for a full first year, but at the end of the first year, you would, in the courses in the second year, you'd find that people are performing at the same level. More recently, we've got a paper coming out, SIG CSE, that shows that you can do it in a single semester, that if you just separate people fall term, essentially, of the first year, you can then bring them together in the second semester and they're performing at an equal level. A quick comment about that, we are seeing some evidence at the point that we bring the two tracks essentially back together again, that even though they're often outperforming the people with prior computing experience, the people who don't have it often still feel like imposters. And so we're having to work with the imposter syndrome issues of having brought the streams back together. The other major thing we do at CSU that's proven very effective is we have gotten rid of the notion that it's nice to do examples from mathematics. As your programming example, you don't teach recursion with Fibonacci numbers. You don't do that kind of thing. It tilts it towards a particular group of people who A, have a math background and are B, fascinated by those sorts of small mechanical things. You instead work on larger problems. You can use recursion, for example, to search for regions of a map, to track fire burn if you want, or something like that. But give people concrete examples of how computing can actually be used for a wide range of societal problems in your courses, and you will find that you in general bring more people into computing, because they start to say, oh, I can use it for something that's interesting to me. And one way to think of this is try to create if all the programming assignments in your course or all the examples in your course, try to think about having an example that for an entirely different group of people each week, they'll go, oh, I can use computing for that. So you're trying to get everybody to see themselves at some point in one of your computing programming challenges, problem sets, assignments, or something, that they should say, oh, this is why I'm here, right? So I've talked longer than I intended.
Yeah, Margaret, then Manuel.
Sure, I'll just add a little more. So I tend not to teach intro classes too often, but I really have put in a push in my teaching life over the past 10 years or so to think about just the mechanisms of the classroom experience that can help with a feeling of belonging and a feeling of inclusion. So for example, I ask a question pretty early in my first lecture every semester, and I make it clear that it's not rhetorical that I'm asking a question. I make it clear that I'm going to wait until I get some hands raised and we start to talk about it. And I make it clear that they're going to be talking during this class. And then the next thing that I make clear is that I try not to call on the same person over and over and over again. And the folks who are the early bird hand raisers and the frequent hand raisers, they figure it out and they're okay with it. And then the third part of this is making it feel safe to raise your hand when you think you know the answer, but you're not sure, or when you don't know the answer and you have a question. I think creating a classroom that feels safe to ask questions is really helpful for everyone. It's helpful for me because I figure out what they actually know versus what they're just looking like they know. And it's helpful for them and their peers because the right questions get asked. So that's one thing. I'll also take on something that got asked in the chat here about terms not as welcome by marginalized students. One of the classes that I've taught for a long time over the years is called Great Moments in Computing. And it's about going back to the original seminal works of our field in different topic areas and digging in a discussion-oriented way. And I will just say that it warms my heart to see a couple of alums from that class in the participants list here. So awesome. Anyway, one of the things that you take on when you teach a 50-year-old paper or a 70-year-old paper is that the language, the culture, the approaches were really non-inclusive back then. And so you have to make a decision as an instructor. Do I teach Turing's paper on the Turing test because it's a seminal piece of work? Or do I not, because it doesn't portray either Asians or women in a very inclusive way? And what I've chosen to do is to teach the papers that I'm going to teach, but include in the discussion and acknowledgement of the problematic approach, the problematic language, the problematic analogies, and how some parts of this work have stuck true over the years, and some parts of this work we just need to disavow at this point. So I think sort of opening it up for discussion and then like acknowledging it and owning it is another strategy for some of this. And I'm really eager to hear what Manuel and others have to say, because I'm always trying to figure this out. Thanks.
Actually, a lot of the things I had to say, either Craig or Margaret mentioned, but I'm going to say a little bit more on the participation. I think we're, it's no surprise to anybody that a lot of us computer scientists are not very social animals for whatever reason. My wife is a language professor, and as a language professor, everybody has to talk in the class. And I'm always amazed at all the strategies she uses to get people to talk. And I'm like, I need to do more of those. I mean, there are ways to get people to participate. The idea of raising hand, the idea of, she keeps track of who she asks in this class. Okay, you, and she puts a check. And by the end of the class, she knows who hasn't participated, and she goes, okay, you, can you? So we need, I don't ever even imagine doing that. Also, my classes have 70, hers has 28, but that's another issue. But it's the idea of being intensive and inclusive and going out of the way of saying everybody should talk, everybody should participate. It's really important. Another aspect that I wanted to add was pronouns and name pronunciation. Again, what she does is she passes a list and has a column that says, tell me your pronoun and how you want me to address you, and put in there the name you want me to address you, even if it is the same name that is on the roster. So the list doesn't have just the ones that have a different name. The list has everybody's name, and that's the list she uses to call people by name, and that's it. And it doesn't matter if you're the only one in the classroom that has a different name, or if your name is gender representative or not. So again, there's strategies that other communities have done that we just need to learn how to do it. I also agree on the idea that we don't hide the past. We just have to acknowledge that, master slave, yeah, that's a term that sucks today. Let's call it something different and move forward, rather than covering up and pretending it's not there, because then you're sort of being complicit on not acknowledging the history. So Margaret, I applaud you for still addressing those topics and saying, yeah, that we didn't know any better, we do now. And the reality is tomorrow we'll know more, and some things that we say today might not be appropriate. This is always, society is changing continuously. There'll be new things that tomorrow will be considered offensive that we're using today. We just gotta go with the flow.
Okay, great. I'm gonna pull up another question from the Q&A box, and I think maybe this is directed to you first, Tracy, and then maybe Mythili, you could chime in on your personally how you answer this question. And the question is, how do you do the work, or more particularly, how do you decide what work to do? So, we've talked about pipeline issues, recruiting, retention, the program, the curricula. There's a bazillion things one could do, right? And I think the question is, let me read the last part of it. What parts of Tracy's do the work? Where do you encourage people to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first task is to figure out where your issues are. So you should analyze your data, measure, what your situation is, so you understand where your issues are. Do you have a recruitment issue? Do you have a culture issue? Do you have a retention issue? I mean, what is the issue you're trying to solve? And then the next step, this is the process I follow anyways. The next step is to set goals associated with the issue you're trying to solve. And I'm a big proponent of SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely goals. Then you implement strategies that will address one of your goals, a specific strategy. Then implement that strategy, and then measure how you did, and then loop back up. So it's this continuous process where you measure where you are, implement an activity, a strategic activity, and loop back up. And you may have lots of problems that you need to solve. You may have a long list of things. And so then I would just encourage people to focus on what interests you, because if you focus on what you're most passionate about, you're going to get more done. And there is a long list of great ideas of things to do as far as activities on the bpcnet.org. I'll put the link in chat if Margaret doesn't beat me to it. bpcnet.org has a long list of things that you can do depending on what you, what your goal is and where you want to try to make an impact. Within the bpcnet.org website, what I would look at specifically is go to the page that is go to writing resources and then customize your BPC plan. And they have resources, for example, for building community, faculty retention, outreach, etc. And so lots of great information on things that you can implement. I also want to give a shout out to NCWIT has this multi-page document that lists 81 suggestions of things you within your department or community to make your community more welcoming and diverse. I'll put the link to that in the chat as well. Within CS at Minds, we did 79 or 74 of the 81. And our numbers, the percent of women, doubled the percent of other groups marginalized in tech. So I think things are things to think about as well, some of which are very easy to do, some take a lot more effort, but I encourage you to check out those ideas as well and do the work. Thanks
Great.
For asking that question.
Great. So Mythili, we got some great advice from Tracy. For you personally, I'd like to follow Tracy's advice. I'm not sure I always do. I sometimes miss some of the letters and skip a few of the steps, but what's been your experience and how you choose what to work on and then that process you go through? Then we're going to go to Craig, and then we normally stop at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock Central European time. We were going to run this until 15 minutes past the hour. So I think after Mythili and Craig will ask if anybody has some last comments, and then we're going to wrap things up, but we're going to continue on Slack. So with that, Mythili?
Yeah, thanks. So Tracy mentioned some excellent points. So just a few things that I would like to add is probably, it'll, in my view, it'll help if we take sort of specific examples of, ABC, these people who are involved in this, who have an issue, and kind of follow their story through, this, has it helped, right? So go follow a more bottom-up approach where you pick a few example cases whom you want, to participate more or who are marginalized in some way, and kind of take a more fine-grained feedback from them. Is this working out? Would you like things done differently? Because a lot of times there might be some issue in the implementation that we may not realize. The actual stakeholders may not realize something is going wrong. It may not be working for them. So I think, I think all the efforts going on are great, but a more fine-grained feedback and closely following the actual stakeholders in the process would, I think, help. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Craig?
So I just was going to comment, I'll skip over all the great advice Tracy gave, which is exactly right, and just add two things. So in terms of picking, So I have financial resources as a department chair that I devote to diversity. And the first thing I ask is, we worked out our goal, bring more women into computing is our #1 goal for the department. Then the question on any given year is, where, if I invest money, am I going to get the greatest traction? So where am I actually going to move the needle the most? Because it's important. One of the reasons is it's important for everybody, the students, the faculty, everyone, to see that needle keep moving. So my goal is to say, where can I most effectively put the money? And also people time. I am lucky. All of my faculty are supportive of diversity. I don't have anybody in my faculty who's opposed to the diversity effort. Then there's the question of who can I deploy where? How can they help? Where do I apply the resources? So getting that traction, because it can be very frustrating. Even if you do everything right, the needle may only move a little bit the first year or two. I remember getting that advice from Marie Claude. It was like, it's going to take you a couple of years to start to see the needle move, but you've got to get it moving. It really is. So you're putting that investment in getting that needle to move. So.
Okay, great. So any last comments? So Margaret, Ahmed, Manuel, before we close up, and then I'm going to ask Matt to remind people one last time about the Slack channel. Manuel, you're first, and then Ahmed.
One just last comment, sort of wrapping it up back to the definition of diversity that I gave at the beginning. Diversity is an asset to your organization. Your organization will be better by having more diverse set of voices. And to me, that means this is just like your financial, your personnel, an asset that you have to manage. I don't see increasing diversity as something that will ever finish. At some point, we'll have different groups that are not there, and we have to increase them. So I see diversity as just something you have to manage. And the sooner you bring it inside of the organization group, the sooner you stop abusing the 3 minorities or the 2 women that are in your departments, and you think of their job to increase diversity. No, it's everybody's responsibility, because the organization will be better. So fold it into the associate chairs, fold it into the committees, and make sure everybody is distributed. Make sure that in the diversity, when you have a senior professor and a junior professor, just make it part of your regular organization, because that way you start doing the work like Tracy says, and you start distributing the workload on everybody.
Yeah, so what I wanted to add here is basically having the right data is very important, as Tracy said, and we don't really have we're not continuously collecting data on how we're doing on diversity and inclusion and retention. So it's quite important to manage up to ACM, IEEE, to start collecting this data and make it part of essential or like integral to the process. So we have data to allow us to monitor our progress. And then we can identify the low-hanging fruits and the achievable goals that we can do and track them.
I'll just quickly plus one what Ahmed said, data, because I think data is very motivational for, we're the choir. I assume that the 70 odd people here are the choir that we're preaching to. But there's other parts of the community that still need to get on board. Sadly, I don't know how, but they do. And data can help with that. And so what is the demographic mix of first authors at your key conferences versus the participant demographics? What is the demographic mix of applicants to your PhD program as opposed to the folks who are there? There's some pretty big gaping data holes. And knowing where we stand on that would really help us know how to move. It's that the measurable part of the goals. Thanks.
Okay. Well, that's great. You called us 70 odd people. I don't think we're all odd, but that's okay. I think I know what you meant. Matt, you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, so thank you very much to the panelists for your insightful thoughts. This was a great discussion. Thank you very much to the audience as well. You all asked some really amazing questions. This was really helpful. We want to invite you to continue the discussion on the Slack. You go to the Zoom chat and see the links for that. So feel free to join that and continue the discussion, exchange thoughts and ideas. We also want to remind you the networking channel is a regular series of talks. We're going to have more talks. The one 2 weeks from now is going to be on the early days of the internet outside of the United States. It should be very interesting how it evolved and how it grew, and lessons we learned from that process and how they might apply to the future. But yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you all. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.